Hello there, Nikki here, and welcome to another network automation video. So today I'm going to provide a simple demo of Ansible Roles. So you might find that as you create playbook directories, you find that you're repeating common tasks in multiple playbooks. You might be using the include tasks option or include variables to pull in variables and tasks that you had previously created. But there is another way, and that's where Ansible Roles comes into play. So basically what Ansible Roles is, it's just a way to package a group of variables, tasks, templates, even automated tests into an easier to manage format, which you can use to reuse code that you've created, but also to share it with others if need be. So starting off, I just want to show my topology again. So it's a simple WAN. I've shut down all of my nodes with the exception of my two switches. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create an Ansible role to deploy VLANs on these two switches. So with Ansible roles, it's if you want to call a role in your playbook directory, it expects a roles subdirectory. You can put it into a central directory as well, but in this instance, I'm going to just have it in the same directory that I'm going to create my main playbook. So that roles subdirectory would then contain all of your relevant roles, and each role has to follow a particular directory structure. There's a way that you can just automatically create all the necessary directories, which I'm going to do here. So I've just created the subdirectory roles, and in here I'm going to now create a new role. So I use the Ansible Galaxy command, which is automatically included when you install Ansible. And I'm going to create my role. So I'm going to call this new role deploy VLANs, and that will then create another subdirectory. And if we have a look at the directories that have been created in the deploy VLANs directory, you can see then the structure of a role. So we have these directories, the ones that you must have if you were to create these manually is the vars directory, the templates directory, and the tasks directory. I believe they're mandatory. Some of the other ones here include the defaults directory, which you would store default variables. So there's two directories where you can store variables, vars and defaults. The difference here is the vars have a higher precedence than defaults. So if we were just to have a quick look at Ansible variable precedence, it's documented in their using variables section of their documentation. So if we just have a look at that, and we just think it's here, you can see this is the reverse order of precedence for where you store variables, which is quite a lot. But they advise in here, keep it simple, and don't try and store your variables in multiple places. It'll get confusing very quickly. But for the purposes of this video, you will see that that role defaults is much lower precedence than the role variables, the role vars here at number 15. And you'll also see further up is group vars also have a higher precedence than role defaults. So I'm going to demonstrate that as part of this video. So what we're going to do is we're going to create some variables in defaults. In the templates directory, we're going to create some Jinja 2 templates. And in the tasks directory, we're going to call the templates. And then in an overall, in my main playbook directory, I will create a playbook that calls this role, and I'll show the different ways that you can call the roles. So if we just start off by going to the templates directory, So let me see, templates. So by default, that's a blank directory. So I've prepared a template in my home directory, and I just called it create. Sorry, I need a CP here. So my home directory roles prep create vlans.j2. So if we just have a look at this, it's a very simple configuration. So create the VLAN with the VLAN name with the VLAN ID and VLAN name variables. So we will declare those in group vars. We create the SVI, the IP address, where we use the site ID, which is declared in my host inventory file. Third octet is the VLAN ID. And then we enable OSPF on this SVI with the OSPF.PID and area variables, which I'm going to declare in my defaults directory. And then later on, I'll show how we can override that. So if I start off by going into the defaults directory, the Ansible Galaxy command automatically created a main.yaml file. So if I go in there, we can then create our OSPF variables. So it's just going to be PID 100 and area 1. So they will be called automatically. And then in group vars, which is in my playbook directory, so if I just cd into group vars, I've got an all directory, and in there if I create an all.yaml, and I'll create my VLAN ID. So we'll just say we create a VLAN 50 and VLAN name, and we'll give it a name of server VLAN. So now we've created our variables. Next thing we need to do is create our task. So we go back into our roles. So deploy VLANs into tasks, and the task is always called main.yaml. So I've also in my prep directory I have pre-prepared a main.yaml. So I'm just going to copy this and then we can explain it. Oh, I didn't copy it properly. Let me just try that again. So here I'm just using the template module as I did before, and my source is my templates directory, the create vlans.j2, and my destination is my home directory, Ansible v10 roles output, and then I'm going to create a configuration file which have the format of the switch host name, and then .lan.conf. And then I also have hashed out here an iOS config module, which will take the generated config and deploy it to the switches. I've just hashed this out for now, and we're going to just generate the config. So that's the tasks created. Oh, did I forget to save it? I did. Well, let me just do that again. And next we call the role in our playbook directory. So if I just copy this YAML file into my playbook directory. So in this YAML file, this is where I call the roles. So the roles are called down here, and it's simply just the roles module and dash deploy VLANs, the name of the role. Very simple. I've also created a simple task here with iOS command module that just does a show run and includes host name and prints the output. The reason that I've done this is I just want to show the order here. Typically what we would be used to is that the Ansible will run down through each of the tasks that we declare in here sequentially, including the different modules that we may call. But in this instance, when we use roles will always run first. So it's important that if you're running tasks and creating a role, that you understand that the roles in this format will run first. So I think we should be ready to run this one. Oh, I must create the output directory as well so that we can save our generated config. So let's just see if this runs and I haven't created any errors. So you can see that this is the role running first, and then the tasks, which was declared above, runs second. So we've created two configuration files, and there's the host name for the debug message. So if we just cd into the output, we can see that we have we can see that we've generated config for our VLAN 50 and enabled OSPF and configured the IP address. So that's what we expected. So that's calling our simple role. So we can also pass variables into our role, and I just want to demonstrate that next. So if we just we change the format here as follows. So we need to delete, or rather leave that. If I just declare my role, deploy VLANs, then I can set values I can set values to the variables that are called in the role. So say I wanted to say VLAN ID is not 50 but 60, and VLAN name, let's say we call it the backup VLAN. And if you remember, the VLAN 50 variables are declared at the moment in the defaults directory of the role, which has the lowest precedence. So these variables in here should take precedence over that. So hopefully this time when I run it, I will have VLAN 60 created. So let's just run this. I think that should be okay. And we run it again. So we have a change this time, so something different happened. And if we cd into the output folder, we have two files generated. Let's just check the same one again, switch to. And this time it's VLAN 60 with the name backup VLAN, and the third octet is 60 as expected. So the other thing I wanted to show was actually, I made a mistake there in that I said that the VLANs are declared in the defaults directory. The VLANs are declared in the group vars directory, but in the defaults directory, if we just double check again, I think that's where I put my OSPF sessions. Right, that's my OSPF sessions are in the defaults file. In the group vars, I declared the VLAN 50. So this is down to precedence again. When I declare the variables when calling the role inside the playbook, that overrides the group vars. But now I'm going to declare the OSPF variables in group vars as well, and I'm going to override the defaults. So let's do that. So if I go into group vars and my all and go into all.yaml, if I now recreate that OSPF and give it say a PID, process ID of, I don't know, 50 and area 50 as well. So this should now override the defaults. So let's run it one more time. So it changed again. And we have a look at our output directory. And this time we're OSPF process ID 50 in area 50. So just to summarize there, because I did make a mistake, I have my VLANs originally created in my group vars all directory all.yaml file. And then I overrided those values by declaring the VLAN ID and VLAN name in my playbook directory when I call my role. So that's one useful way to pass variables into a role when you're calling it. And then for the OSPF process ID and area number, I had that declared in my defaults main.yaml file under my roles directory structure, and I overrode that by declaring the same variables with different values in the group vars all and all.yaml file. So that's two ways. But the other thing is we can also loop through roles and pass multiple VLANs. So we created VLAN 50, then we changed it and we created VLAN 60. But what if we had multiple VLANs and we wanted to pass them all into the roles at the same time? So that's done in a different way again. So if we just go back in here, this time we're not going to use the roles. So let's just delete them, or we'll just hash them out. In fact, I do copy my playbooks up to GitHub afterwards. So if I hash them out, they'll all be in there. So if you go to GitHub he-pings, you'll find all of my playbooks that I show in each of the videos. So the way to loop, you don't use it via the roles module. You have to use the include roles. Right, let me spell it right. So it's include roles. Include role, and we just call it with the name submodule deploy VLANs, and then we loop. And we can pass a variable. So if we want to declare multiple VLANs somewhere, say we call it VLANs, and whatever is in this structure that I'm about to create in group vars, it will pass that when into the deploy VLANs role when it calls the role. So let's just go into group vars again. and I've just prepared vlans.yaml file. So if I go into vlans.yaml, it's 3 VLANs, VLAN 50, which is a server VLAN, 60 the backup VLAN, and 70 a management VLAN. So it's just a dictionary with the 3 list elements. So if I just go back, one interesting thing about include role is now it's inside a task, so it's going to run sequentially. So if we were just to move the debug here to the bottom, what will actually happen is the iOS command will run first, then our role, and then our debug. While previously when we used the roles module, the role always runs before any tasks that you declared, regardless of how you structure it. So because we're looping, our template is going to change. So let's go back into our roles, deploy VLAN templates. So instead of VLAN ID now, we need to tell it that we're looping and use the keyword item. So it's going to be item.VLAN ID, item.VLAN name, and the same in our SVI, and our third octet of our IP addressing. Right. Also, what I want to do is in tasks, main.yaml. I'm just going to include the VLAN numbering as well. So if I just push item.VLAN underscore ID, actually it's not VLAN underscore ID, it's item.id. The reason I'm doing this here is that when you loop through a role, it actually runs the role 3 separate times, in my case for each of those VLANs. So when I run this role, you will see, because I have hashed out the deployment, the first time it runs on VLAN 50, I will my file in my output directory will be populated with VLAN 50. The second time it overwrites that with VLAN 60, and the third time with VLAN 70. So when my playbook runs without the deployment, when we look at the output directory, I'm only going to have VLAN 70 in there. But I'm going to run it twice. The second time I'm actually going to deploy it, and we'll see that it does deploy each VLAN. It's just that when we're finished, we won't have captured each run of it. So let me just go back into templates. Yeah, it should be item.id and .name. And item.id. I think that's correct now. So if I just verify that again, it's Ansible v10 group vars all vlans.yaml. So yeah, it's ID and name. It's not VLAN underscore ID and VLAN underscore name like I had done previously. So if we go back now, and hopefully this will run successfully and I don't have any errors. First of all, my posts file. So you see that it's running sequentially this time. The role doesn't run first. So iOS command runs, now include role. So you can see that it runs each time. This is why I in the name I put the VLAN ID the item.id variable. So I can see that it runs for VLAN 50, VLAN 60, VLAN 70, and then afterwards, because I move down the debug task, it displays my host name for my two devices. And as I was saying, because it runs the role 3 times and loops through the VLAN structure that I created, when I go into my output folder, I only have the last iteration, the VLAN 70 in here. I've lost the VLAN 60 and the VLAN 50. So if I now make my final modification, cd roles, deploy tasks and vi main.yaml, and now let's hash out our deployment. So that would be, need to bring it back here. And we're pointing it at the output directory, the config that we generated, and we're going to deploy it to the switches. So if we have a look at one of the switches to start off, so say switch 2, I need to log back in. Let me just do that. I'm going to switch 2, and we just have a look at show VLAN. We 10, 20, 30, and show IP int brief, and SVI 10, 20, 30. So now let's just double check. Yeah, now we're going to deploy. So let's go back up. And the final run, we should now deploy, loop through our roles with each VLAN and deploy 3 VLANs to our 2 switches. So we do our show run include hostname task, and we generate the config for VLAN 50, deploy VLAN 50. We can see we're getting some messages pop up here. So that's switch 2, switch 3 done for VLAN 50, and the same thing for the other 2 VLANs. And VLAN 70. And finally the debug just to display the host name. So now when we go into our switch, we can see we're getting the messages that VLAN 50, 60 and 70 change state to up. And just to verify, we now have those 3 extra VLANs, show IP and brief, and we have our 3 SVIs which will be included in our OSPF processor. So we can see here that they're in IP OSPF process 50 area 50, and that concludes my video on roles, which is a really good way to create reusable code. And if we just have a look finally at the structure of our roles directory, it's a really good way to package up a group of variables, tasks, templates, etc. There's also one subdirectory I didn't mention, which was the test directory. So if you have any automated tests, you can include that in your role. So then you'd have one role that, say, generates your VLAN config, deploys your VLAN config, and then runs a test to verify it and it's very powerful. I hope that's is useful for you, and that concludes this video. Thank you very much.